Kate LaFalcha. Welcome to Irish Granny Helen. We're continuing our Saturday book, and this is video number 2 of the Sirius system by Robert Temple. New scientific evidence of alien contact 5,000 years ago. And you should probably go watch video number 1 if you haven't seen it yet. We're picking up where we left off there, and we're describing this anomalous moon, Phoebe, moon of Saturn, number 10, that seems to fit into the archaeology and mythology, specifically of the Dogon, this tribal group of people who have a very unusual culture that connects to, in many ways you're going to see, to ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, and ancient Sumer. So Temple asks the question that nobody else dares to ask: is this thing artificial? Because it doesn't look like any other moon. He describes Sumer's Enki. Enki is like one of these gods that came. He is amphibious. He lives in a freshwater chamber, like an ark, is how it's described, in a swampland stretched out, and he has possibly a fishtail, as it describes him. Could Phoebe be that chamber? So there was an alarm that was set off in 1981 by the arrival of Voyager 1 around Saturn. He's speaking metaphorically here, that the presence of Voyager 1 around Saturn may potentially have given notice to these ETs. These humans, they're up to something. They're finally in the neighborhood. Have the Nomus awakened, is what he's asking. Others have suggested the existence of space arcs full of generations of ETs that have been mistaken for planets. There's a lot of stuff out there. We don't know what it is. And we're not going to get too much into that, but it's just an interesting thought experiment. The Dogons predict the return of the Nomus on the day of the fish. They will land, and out of them will emerge our mythical ancestors. Now, let me go back and tell you once again that the Dogon believed there was this new star, possibly an artificial spaceship, space station kind of thing, where the ETs are hanging out. And they're called the Nomus. And it's called the 10th moon. And there is indeed a 10th moon of Saturn that is completely anonymous, with a retrograde orbit, a smooth surface. What's going on? Okay, so the Dogon predict the return, and they're going to show up, and they will be amphibians. They're mysterious ancestors. And that they will rule the earth from the water. And his question is, that's not good. How are they going to view the state of our oceans right now? Their first priority might be cleaning up the seas, getting rid of oil and plastic. He says, this is just speculation. Don't get excited, It drives his peers crazy when he starts these questions, because this is challenging to think about. He says, listen, all the people that are freaking out when he talks about this used to say there were no other planets, and now they know there's all kinds of other planets out there with life on it, all kinds of variety of life. We just don't know what. He wonders about Mars. He says, why does a financially broke NASA see weird things on Mars and suddenly send 10 missions in 10 years? Now, this is written in 1997. I would extrapolate from that and say, what does Elon Musk know that the rest of us don't know? Why did Russia join NASA in this joint project? And the next question is, why is Musk so interested? He says, reports escalated. First, they found bacteria on the surface. Then they found worms, then they found ice, then they found water, then they saw signs of huge floods, and then they saw signs of oceans in the past. He says, is this a policy of slow leaks to test our reaction? Titrate the information a little bit at a time. Maybe the foolish humans won't get so excited. Just a thought. The only ones to get upset by ETs will be religious fanatics. He says it'll be like a theological Copernican upheaval. So, what is the mystery? Let's talk about what this mystery of Sirius is. The question to be asked: has Earth in the past been visited by intelligent beings from a region of the star Sirius? Temple in the university belonged to a study group led by Arthur Young and the Foundation for the Study of Consciousness. Now, these are scientists, right? Young was writing the book Consciousness and Reality. He was into obscure global mythologies. He didn't turn his nose up at it. He said there's something to be learned from our ancestors. He told Temple about the Dogon a long time ago. The starting point of creation is the star which revolves around Sirius and is actually named the Digitaria star. We'll talk about how it got that name. It's regarded by the Dogon as the smallest and the heaviest of all the stars. It contains the germs of all things. Now, we're not talking microbes, viruses, and bacteria. We're talking germs as in seeds of all things. Its movement on its own axis and around Sirius upholds all creation in space. We shall see that its orbit determines our calendar. Okay, where am I? The Dogon called it Digitaria, and it revolves around Sirius every 50 years. Remember the number 50. It's an important number here. Temple's copy of an original French version of the myths that he paid big money to have translated was stolen. It was borrowed overnight by a guy who fled with it cross country and was later known to be associated with the CIA, as though they didn't want him to have an accurate translation of these ancient myths, that this was one of the only copies. Temple over time met a number of scholars researching various mysteries. He mentions our hero, Erich von Däniken. Say what you want. I love Erich von Däniken. The Antikythera computer, and I know I said it wrong, the Babylonian math in New Guinea, anomalous crystals in Crete. We're going to talk about all these things. Mysterious metals in a Chinese tomb. So he was distracted and decided to focus on one thing. So much to know, so many weird, anomalous things. I have a book that's almost 900 pages called Forgotten Archaeology with pictures, and it's absolutely unbelievable. If anybody is interested, it's by Michael Cerna, something like that. I'll think of it here in a minute and blurt it out. So Temple was distracted. He decided to focus on the Dogon. How did they know about Sirius B? Sirius B is not visible to the human eye. We're talking thousands of years ago. How did they know it was there? He reminds us of occulted knowledge, secret traditions of priests and oral wisdom, and how they figured out how to preserve the knowledge. The Dogon recognized that revealing it would preserve it instead of hiding it for the priests, to a special little group. Make it part of your cultural story and preserve it in story form. Temple traced the Dogon knowledge back to ancient Egypt, and we will talk about how he did that. It seems to indicate that the Earth was in contact with intelligent beings from the Sirius system. Humankind struggles to comprehend our place in the universe, but we are slowly waking up. He emphasizes the importance of space exploration and the development of the technology and tools needed to advance that. He says, are we alone in the universe, perverse in our disharmony? Is everything else out there in harmony except us? Are we the exceptions? We must look outward, and if we do, we'll learn about ourselves. For example, the importation of civilization from space. Did that happen? At a period approximately, I should tell you, this is from Professor W.B. Emery, his book, Archaic Egypt. At a period approximately 3,400 years before Christ, a great change took place in Egypt, and the country passed rapidly from a state of advanced Neolithic culture with a complex tribal character to two well-organized monarchies, one comprising the Delta area and the other the Nile Valley proper. At the same time, the art of writing appears, monumental architecture, the arts and crafts developed to an astonishing degree, and all the evidence points to the existence of a well-organized and even luxurious civilization. All this was achieved in a comparatively short period of time, for there appears to be little or no background to this fundamental developments in writing and architecture. I think what they're saying is it's rather like you had an infant that went from not being able to lift its head to walking overnight. That's an exaggeration. Or you went from a child who couldn't read and write, who was on a high school level the next day. There's something missing. There's a period of development that is just completely missing. The time is filled, but it's not filled with what you would expect to see. It goes from Neolithic to advanced with nothing in between. Very strange. How? There was an abrupt rise of civilization and an abrupt rise of knowledge. How? And he says, well, let's ask. Do we owe it to ETs? And I wrote big capital letters, Paul Wallace. Go back, and if you haven't seen them already, listen to my coverage of the books by Paul Wallace. He has another one coming up. I'll just drop that hint. Part 1. Now, that was just the introduction. Part 1. The serious question is posed. So this is actually chapter 2, the knowledge of the Dogon. Sirius is the brightest star. It's large and clear, the brightest star up there in their part of the sky. There have been searches for intelligent life in space. For example, Project Ozma, which I think is interesting, in 1960, that they were listening for signals from space, radio signals. He believes that there was ET contact from Sirius somewhere between 7,000 and 19,000 years ago. Sirius B was discovered because it caused Sirius A to wobble. So now this starts to get into astronomy that I'm not really great at, but apparently Sirius B is really, really heavy. And when they get within a certain distance of each other, its mass creates a wobble in Sirius A. But you can't see Sirius B. So modern times, we got the telescopes. How did the Dogon know that was what they were looking at? How did they know that Sirius A was wobbling? I mean, how did they know that? So it's called, Sirius B is called a white dwarf. It was the first one ID'd, and white dwarfs are small. There's not a lot of light from them, but they're very powerful, and they have a very powerful gravitational pull. So they're little balls of power. And okay, this talks about the sun's density by comparison. The Sirius B's density is 65,000 times more dense than our sun. 65,000 times. That's crazy. It's made of super dense matter. Its electrons are squished together. There is rumor, or I should say there still exists rumor of Sirius C, a third star. It's a big debate. But he says the whole question of man is alone in the universe. He says it's very arrogant. And then he talks a bit about flat earth believers. I don't know if this is important enough to actually read out loud. No, it's just lots and lots of numbers. It's an argument for understanding that the odds, if you're a gambling person, the odds of us being alone in the universe, I wouldn't bet money on it. It's just not good odds. The possibility that intelligent life is abundant and in fact occurs in practically every planet. In this case, the average distance from one intelligent community to the next is 10 light years. For comparison, the nearest star of any kind is about 1 light year away. So they're just saying odds are overwhelming that we're not alone. So he shows how much technological progress we've made just in the past 100 years. And he talks about the combustible nature of progress. Once a society reaches a certain takeoff point, technological progress is usually huge, very rapid. We couldn't even imagine a society just ahead of us any more than our great-grandparents could have predicted today. I like to think I'm not that old, and I think back to when I was a kid, middle school, 12, 13, 14. One of the popular social, cultural touch points was the TV show Maxwell Smart, the terribly bumbling spy, but it was futuristic. And the thing I always remember is he had a telephone in his shoe, and he would take his shoe off and talk into his shoe, which was, ludicrous, funny in and of itself. But the real brain twister there was not that he was talking into his shoe, but that he had a telephone that worked without being plugged into anything. It had no wires. It didn't get plugged in. That was the hard part to understand. So there are 3 choices of society, a primitive society that can't send messages, us who might receive but don't send, and then this magical notion of a society that can send and receive. Would there be an advanced enough civilization for interstellar travel? Well, it's very likely. And therefore, if we could have been visited, sampled, and periodically revisited to monitor our progress, would that be possible? Stories of ET visits could be misinterpreted or embellished, depending on when and where the visit happened. They could be religious, the stories. I mean, what are they talking about? The Tlingit of northeastern America has an oral tradition. Talks about 1786 visit from black birds from the sky, like from far in the sky. Sumer, there are stories of amphibious races, an amphibious race from space who were superhuman, kind of semi-demon, semi-gods, not gods, but demiurges. They were long-lived. They, talk about Methuselah. These guys lived a long time too, that returned to the sky. And their superiors with samples that they collected here. The same story exists in sub-Saharan Africa. Before the Sumerians were the Akkadians with K's, and they were a Semitic people. The Sumerians were not a Semitic people. The Babylonians evolved or gave way to the Assyrians. They gave way to the Persians and then the Hebrews. But the Sumerians were a whole other kettle of fish. Pardon the pun. Noah is a name for the guy in the story that's a more recent Hebrew version for an older Sumerian Noah. Sumer had stories of amphibians. Now, Abraham, just keep this in mind, Abraham was the forefather, I guess you'd call it, of the Jews and the Arabs. They're Semites, all of them. The Dogons, plus 33 other tribes, are around the area of Mali and Upper Niger on the banks there. They're close to Timbuktu. The first time they were ever seen by white people was 1830. They have a sacred religious tradition that has to do with the Sirius star system, and it has knowledge of a star that nobody knew about, Sirius B. The most important star in the sky in their mind is Sirius B, which cannot be seen. So how? We don't know. We don't know how they knew. They say the ETs told them. Westerners were first hearing about it, as it was called Digitaria, because of Potolo, which was what they called it. And that meant grain star. And the grain they were talking about was Digitaria exilis, was the name, the plant name, the botanical name. And so eventually it got shortened to Digitaria. They knew that the star system obeyed the Kepler laws of planetary motion. That planetary motion is elliptical. When you think about, planets go around the sun. Going around kind of implies it's a circle, but it's not. It's an elliptical path. And they knew that without telescopes. They also knew that the path was kind of egg-shaped and it had two focal points. These are Kepler's laws of planetary motion. These were not codified for a very long time after the Dogon knew all about it. So how did they know? How did they know about elliptical orbits? So there's a drawing here that I'll show you just to sort of emphasize what we're talking about. This book has all kinds of interesting, stuff like this. All kinds of interesting things in this book. They also knew that the orbital period, what that is the length of time it takes it to get from point A all the way around the orbit path back to point A. That's the period. And they knew that it was 50 years. Remember I told you, remember the number 50, it repeats itself everywhere. They also knew that Sirius rotates on an axis. How did they know that? They had a day of the Badarite. This is when the rays with important signals strike the Earth from Sirius B. They called it the infinity, and in science, it's a white dwarf. White dwarf is the tiniest visible star. So the Dogon maybe didn't have our technical names for any of these things, but they understood inherently what they were, how they acted, where they were, and they incorporated that knowledge into their cultural narrative. They also knew that it was the heaviest. How did they know that? Dogon myth is now officially accepted science. But then it was just their sacred beliefs. And Temple includes the full myth as an appendix to this book because their ancient myth is so far 100% in agreement with our science today. He refers to a book, The Pale Fox, which is too much to include in my explanation I wrote down, and it's uncannily accurate. You know, I'm going to tell you the important stuff to keep in mind about this, but the authors of The Pale Fox don't talk about ET influence. But how did the Dogon know about all this random scientific stuff? It's possible to learn a lot more about the Dogon beliefs in this book, The Pale Fox, and the knowledge relating to astronomy and the Sirius system that the Dogons had. And this just goes on and on and on to mention all the different things that they knew about astronomy. And it's like pages. It's just incredible. And it's all been shown to be true. How did they know that? You know, that's what we keep returning to. They knew about the halo around Saturn, which is only visible with a telescope. They also described the movement in the stars and spiraling worlds like circulation of blood. How did they know about circulation? It wasn't until Harvey in the early 17th century really understood it. And really, in 1546, Bruno knew about it, but nobody listened to him. And in China in the 2nd century BC, but how did these guys know? These guys were earlier and removed from these people. They also understood that we needed to breathe air, and they knew there was something in the air that we needed to have. I mean, they believed in many populated universes. They knew the Earth turned on an axis in 1 year and orbited the sun. They compared the solar system to a placenta. And they also have a Christ-like figure who gave humans civilization, who was killed on a tree and resurrected and will return after the sign of a certain star in the sky. This is the Dogon belief. So part 2 of the book is called The Sirius Question is Rephrased. Chapter 3 talks about a fairy tale. He says it talks about a dying star that had begun as red, visible at night by night, very bright in the sky. She, the star, died and was greatly missed, and after 70 days, it reappeared at dawn. And in Egypt, every July, they celebrate the return of this goddess. And this 70-day return of this light in the sky that the Egyptians celebrate is why mummification took 70 days, because they were coding the knowledge of a cycle of 70 days from appearance through life, through death, and then rebirth by mummifying for a period of 70 days, the process. This star, if you remember, we talked about this word, S-O-T-H-I-S. The star in the story is called Sothis. That's the Egyptian word for it. And this is actually Egyptian for the Greek Sirius. So what they're saying here is the Egyptians told a story about a star that disappeared and reappeared and disappeared again every 70 days. They made a whole calendar around this called the heliacal rising. This is having to do with in relationship with the sun. This was important to the Egyptians. It was important to the Dogons. Their temples were oriented to the spot that was precise focus on the sky to get the light on their altars. For example, the temple of Isis at Dendera is inscribed about this. This was also important to the Greeks. The dog days, you've heard that expression, the dog days, refer to the heat of summer after okay, so it was believed that there was a period of time when Sirius is there in the sky that is more hot than other times in those days. And they call those the dog days because Sirius was the dog star. And the dog days referred to when Sirius was visible and it got hot. And they believe that the heat was a result of the rising of Sirius, the dog star. Our modern culture is really not aware of the movement of stars. No comment. The level of my ignorance of astronomy is really stunning. I admit that. We've lost our connection to the cosmic orientations. It's hard to see light pollution. But our bodies know. Our bodies obey a circadian rhythm. It's about a day cycle that repeats constantly. It's got to do with hormone levels, brain chemistry, temperature, heart rate, blood pressure. It's all cyclical. Temple calls our ignorance of the stars dementia temporalis. We're isolated and alienated from the larger world of nature. To be outside of nature, he said, is to be an outsider in all things. So now he's going to make me feel bad about myself. He says the Egyptian calendar year on which the diagonal star clocks, called diagonal calendars, were constructed is the well-known civil or wandering year, which consisted of 12 months of 3 10-day weeks divided into 3 seasons of 4 months each, followed by 5 epagomenal days called by the Egyptians the days upon the year. This total of 365 days did not vary, and as a consequence, the Egyptian year moved slowly forward in the natural year by, on the average, 1 day every 4 years. Does this sound a little familiar? As we shall see later, this was a continuously vexing complication in keeping the star clocks adjusted. The basis of these clocks was the rising of the stars, conventionally referred to as decans, D-E-C-A-N-S, at 12-hour intervals through the night and at 10-day weeks through the year. The main star, or decan, was Sirius. The 4 decans immediately before it, in order, comprised the constellation of Orion. And you know, this is the explanation of this. This is why I'm glossing over some of this. That was the not complicated part. Okay, where am I? Sirius is known to the Egyptians as Set, S-E-P-T, or Sothis. So Sirius is Sothis. Sothis is Isis. So why all these names? Well, different time periods, different regions, different mythological systems, but they're all talking about the same persona or star. Egyptian hieroglyph for Osiris is a throne and an eye. Why didn't I mention that? Is because, you know, they believe that they're watching us. Dogon cousins, the Bozo, called the Sirius B the eye star. Isis was drawn as Set, and the first star was Sirius. Isis was the most important to Egypt, and once again synonymous with Sirius. It had a sister goddess named, okay, I'm going to say this wrong, named Nephthys. The question is Nephthys, Sirius B. She's described as an invisible circle near Sirius and looks like Anubis, the dog star. Anubis was the son of Osiris and Nephthys. Also, Anukis, which is this number 3 character that comes into the story and participates in this star system, goddess system. And so are we talking Sirius C? We do now believe that Sirius is a 3-star system. They actually now, conventional science believes it. The Egyptians associated Sirius system with heaven and said it was a watery, weed-growing paradise. Plutarch refers to the birthplace of Isis as forever moist. I don't like that word. Once thought to mean the Nile, and now they're thinking, well, maybe they were getting at something else. Were they talking about watery planets? This suggests some truth to the early stories of intelligent amphibious beings. So he poses an association between zodiacal descriptions of amphibious mermaids, the sirens, Sirius, get it, and Greek Sirius. I can't say it, but it's translated Sirius. Star names and their lore and their meaning is a book by Dick Hinckley Allen. So he goes into this long description of how these names and goddesses are related. So a little bit. The Chinese for Sirius is written as a bow and arrow. And the Egyptians used a bow and arrow to depict Sirius. And the goddess Anubis holds a bow and arrow. The ancient Arabic refers to a star in Sirius that's too heavy to rise over the horizon, Sirius B. The Arab astronomy was informed by the Egyptian astronomy. Does Egypt have a story of a super heavy star in Sirius? Well, let's see. There's a very secret teaching of Egypt that ended up as the very secret teaching of Dogon. The Greeks said constellation Argo was pulled by the tail of Canis Major, the big dog. So, and here's where he's making a lot of associations. And if you really sit down and parse it all out, it's logical and it makes sense. None of it is crazy. It can get complicated and confusing. I'm going to do my best. So think of this constellation Argo. If you remember the story of Jason and the Argonauts were the sailors on the ship Argo. So with the idea in mind that most of these mythological stories were coding astronomy or mathematics or history or visitations from ETs. So let's look at this story. The Greeks said the constellation Argo was pulled by the tail of Canis Major, the dog, right? Argo was Jason's ship, but the Argo was Noah's Ark. Ark is derived linguistically. They're related linguistically, Ark and Argo. The Egyptians believed it carried Isis and Osiris over the deluge. The Hindus said the same thing for Isis, Isi, and Iswara. That's the name of their gods that play this part, same part, in the same story. Potato, potato, different names. They're represented by an arrow in Sanskrit. And the full name of the constellation in Sanskrit is the threefold arrow. Sirius A, B, C. Jason's Argo, Isis, I can't read my word. All of these associations, all of them are associated in some way with the number 50. The 50-year orbit of Sirius around A. B goes around A. Now, they don't go out and just say, oh yeah, there's a star up here that has a periodicity of 50 years. They don't do that. They talk about the coming and going of the boat that has 50 oarsmen. And Sumer and Egypt, which were around the same time and which probably had contact, the Sumerians, their heavenly god was from a watery country, was represented by a jackal, which was interchangeable with a dog. And in both languages, their god was named Anu, A-N-U, and in both Sumerian and Egyptian, repeats often in different forms of the word, like the Anunnaki, Anubis. It's from the same root. So the Anunnaki, these beings in Sumer, come from the same god idea as Anubis, the dog-headed, jackal-headed god in Egypt. And in both countries, Anu is depicted with a dog. In Sumer, An, just the An part, means heaven. And Anu means the god of heaven. In Egypt, Nu means heaven. Did they have a common source? I mean, it begs the question, doesn't it? Osiris is also called An, of the long strides, the god of the long strides. And the heavenly motion, the elliptical orbit, is big. Anubis has an elliptical orbit that is slow moving and long. It's sometimes called, the time when it's obvious in the sky is called the time of the devourer. It's associated with Cronus in Egypt. And Cronus is related to time, and it also means the devourer in Greek. So temple connects the Greek, the Egyptian, the Dogon, the Sumerian religions and figures and words and astronomical facts and some certain buildings and mythology and. It's just awfully coincidental. So these stories are full of symbolic connections, either the word meanings or the numbers that are talked about or the actual story that is told. And they're all connected. I think this is so interesting. He doesn't mention this, but I do. They're all connected to the Hermetic Trimagistic literature of the Platonists. They all talk about these particular notions too. Are mystics dismissed by scriptures scientific deterministic prejudices? So have we sacrificed something on the altar of science is what he's asking. He discusses the link between the Platonists, the Hermeticists, and their relationship to the Egyptians and the Greeks. And there's an ancient papyrus that makes reference to humans that are led by higher beings. Much of this early belief system has been described and then lost or absorbed into the beliefs of other cultures, and it's part of the most esoteric tradition, and the most esoteric of this all is this idea about Sirius. This is like one of the oldest common human cultural religious beliefs, and it's shared by everybody. Even in China, they have symbolism that goes along with this. So he talks about the black rite of the dark god Osiris. And remember that the story and the, what would I call it? The references in these stories often hold the place of scientific fact. So if you believe that Osiris, companion of Sirius, who is Isis, Osiris, the companion of Isis, Isis is Sirius A, Osiris is Sirius B. Why would it be called the black rite of the dark god? It's because it's not visible. It's dark. It's not visible. Hermes was a race of a being, a guy who brought civilization to humans and scrutinizes us from the stars. Hermes was the messenger of the gods, right? This links the pharaoh, I'm going to say this wrong, Imhotep, as sort of a demigod, going back far enough. And is the first real philosopher known by name. The first one that we can say, well, this guy philosophized about this. I mean, we're not saying people didn't earlier. We just don't know who they were. He was into astronomy and astrology, and his astronomy was associated with the priesthood of Thoth, who practiced the dark rite of Osiris, the unseen, Sirius B. They tried to understand the nature of the heavens. They were doing their best, and they didn't have a lot of the at least we don't know, they didn't have the technology that we have now. And all of this is the center of civilization being based in the Sirius system, and it keeps a watchful eye on us, which is why the hieroglyph includes the eye looking down on the chariot and the pyramid. So now we're on chapter 4. I don't know how far we'll get into it. I don't want to make this too long. Chapter 4, the sacred 50. So the Hermetic treatise, The Virgin of the World, it's the name of this writing, says that Isis and Osiris brought the arts and the skills of civilization to humankind. So they repeat the same story. It also taught us how to care for the dead, mummification. It claims, this book, The Virgin of the World, claims that all arts and practices were taught to us by the gods. It does not push astrology, which under Greek influence, the Egyptians were absolutely obsessed with. Also, the Babylonians were obsessed with it. Therefore, it's believed that this origin story predates Ptolemaic Egypt. So that would be when the Greeks were in Egypt. This story happened even before then, even earlier. And so it's not necessarily that the Greeks gave it to the Egyptians. It came before that contact. And the story makes numerous references to the night, which doesn't mean nighttime. It refers to the black rite. It talks about night being much brighter than and smaller than the sun, and the light it shines is very rapid. Small, intense blinks of light. Also, this night moves across the heavens in concert with hidden influences. Night is a code word. It's the companion of Sirius. It's in motion. It emits intense, quick light. It interacts with movements of other bodies. And the star, Sirius B, fits all of these descriptions and characteristics. Looking at early Sumerians, many parts of these stories here, the Hermetics, the Sumerians, intersect, and agree with Egyptian stories. Temple speculates that they share a much more ancient common origin. He notes the famous Egyptologists who think the same thing. He names a bunch of people. Sumerian writings discuss Dilmun. It was a place. We don't know where it was. It was real. It was where the Sumerians went to get timber. You have to think about, they lived essentially in desert country. And if they wanted to build something out of wood, they had to go find it. They had to find a place with trees and cut them down. But not only was it called the place where they got timber, but they also referred to it as the other world. Now, it wasn't the underworld, but they called it the other world. So the question is, where were they going? Is it in the Indus Valley? Did they head off over into India? Was it in Bahrain? Some think it was Egypt. Some think that they were going from Sumer to Egypt. The astronomies of both cultures are identical, their knowledge and their stories. Sumer has a system identical to Egyptian star clocks. Okay, here we go again with the explanations of the star clocks. Oh my God. 12 months of 3 10-day weeks, 36 constellations with likenesses of gods. Both systems allow for the extra 5 days for a 365-day year. They call them the days upon the year. Interestingly, these were also important to the Mayans, and the Mayans included them. Similarity is so close, it means either they were in contact with each other, Egypt and Sumer, or they were separately in contact with an older common origin. It suggests a date past beyond which culture and contact could not have been later. Knowing the latest date the system appeared in Egypt, we know at least how old they are, from about 1300 BC. But it could be much older to get to the origins of Egypt. And all of this fell into disuse as the religion of Ra, the sun god, grew. It grew in importance, and the stars lost some of their light. They lost some of their significance. There's mention of this system in reference to Anubis on Sumerian clay tablets. No one is sure who or what were the Anunnaki. There's lots of theories. But, important fact, there were 50. There's that number again. The story of Gilgamesh is the big source of information about Sumer. This is an antecedent to the later stories of the Greek myths of the Argonauts. In other words, what they're saying is all these Greek myths didn't start with the Greeks. The Greeks took them from Sumeria and from Egypt, and Egypt and Sumeria were connected. So there was much more. This doesn't sound like such a big deal to us now, but at the time, we were under the impression that these cultures didn't really interact all that much, but we know now that's not true. Jason was Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh morphed over time into Jason. So I'll just go through this little chart. Gilgamesh follows the sun. Jason searches for the golden fleece. Gilgamesh has 50 companions. Jason has 50 companions. Then there's this great story. Gilgamesh has the teeth of a dragon, and the story of Gilgamesh talks about sowing these teeth into the ground to gain strength. Jason sows dragon teeth into the ground, and out grows a fighting force of men. Gilgamesh desires to sit on the knee of his mother, the goddess Ninsun. Now we look at the Egyptians. This is something common with the Egyptians. Horus sits on the knee of his mother, Isis. There's a big connection between the golden fleece and the sun. Why, you would ask, why would that be? So there's a connection through Hele, Helle, who flew on a ram and fell in the water of the Hellespont. The Hellespont, which means the bridge of Hele, Hele was kind of a goddess, technically fell in this water. This water actually exists. It's the Dardanelles. It's the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles. This is the water between, it's in Turkey. It's between Asia and Europe. And it's a very significant body of water. And there was a reason she was going over there, riding on a ram, and we'll get to that. So their boats used to have the heads of rams. She's riding on a celestial boat with a ram's head, which was a gift from Hermes. Hermes is the equivalent of Anubis. I know this is getting confusing, but stick with me. And her boat, her ram's head boat, was rowed by 50 oarsmen. She fell in the water. So there's a direct link between Egyptian, Sumerian, and Greek ancient belief. So I'm gonna stop here because we could just go on all night. And too much is too much. So maybe we'll just end number 2 here, and we'll start number 3 next time, and maybe review a tiny bit. Maybe we'll go back over that little chart. But I hope I'm not bombarding you with too much stuff. To me, it's fascinating, so I'm hoping that you're enjoying it too. It's kind of incredible when you think about it. These stories are not to be taken on face value. They're not just fun stories. They're not just religious stories of the Greeks, the gods of the Greek, and these are their gods. They're getting messages across to us, but we're a little dense and don't see it. I think I'll end this by saying this may be foggy, muddy, confusing to us. To the people of the past, all of these things were obvious, and they got the point. They got the message. Over time, eventually it was lost because an oral tradition, it's hard to keep going with it. And if they began taking it on face value. But when the stories were first created, it made sense and people understood the references. They knew who Anubis was. They knew the relationship between Hermes and who was it? Anubis, I don't remember. Sirius, I don't remember. Okay, I have to look that up. That's shameful. I just read it and I can't remember. Hermes. Wait, I went through a lot already. I can't believe it. Okay, I'll have to look it up. That's pretty funny. I can't remember. Was it Jason? No. Who was it? Oh, well. I'll be back. I hope you enjoyed this. And it's a nice little departure from the world of today. Thank you so much for watching. I just so appreciate it. Check out my Substack. There's always something going on over there. In fact, I need to write something. Oh God, so many things to do, so little time. But I appreciate all of you very much. Thank you so much for your support, and have a good weekend. Slán go foill. Slán.